The Adult Ballet Studio is a podcast featuring conversations with the empowering voices of the adult ballet community, a world where passion has no limits and dreams can take flight. My name's Elizabeth Blossfield, and I'm an adult ballet dancer and your host. Welcome to the studio. Happy Tuesday and welcome back to the Adult Ballet Studio. It's officially October, so happy spooky season to all who celebrate. Our guest this month definitely celebrates. In fact, she wrote an entire full-length ballet with the zombies in it. This episode is going to be very festive. Joining the studio this month is someone who is so cool, and I'm very excited to introduce her to all of you because we've been dancing together for several years. Her name is Leigh Purtill, and she's the artistic director for an adult ballet company based in the Los Angeles area called Leigh Purtill Ballet Company. I discovered the company several years ago and loved its mission of ballet for everyone. On its website, leighpurtillballetcompany.org, it says the company's mission is to foster a community of ballet dancers that's reflective of anyone and everyone who wants to participate. Leigh says this means putting dancers on stage who don't fit the outdated mold of the perfect ballerina, who don't all look alike, sound alike, or move alike. I joined the company as a dancer in 2020 and have been so inspired by the community Leigh has built, which was a feat that was easier said than done because maybe you don't know this, but I don't live in LA. I live all the way on the opposite side of the United States in the New York, New Jersey area. But Leigh did a pretty inspiring thing a few years ago during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. She realized how quickly the world was changing and knew that in order to thrive as an inclusive ballet company, they would need to change with it. So she opened up her company to remote dancers all over the world. Now that pandemic restrictions have eased, in-studio classes and live performances are back, and we're so grateful. But at LPBC, Leigh recognized that for various reasons, COVID or otherwise, dancers and audiences might not be able to access in-person shows and classes. So she offers hybrid classes in the LA studio open to company members and the general public, and she broadcasts them in real time over Zoom. She also works with remote dancers to create short films that are showcased at each live performance in California, and later live streamed in a special streaming event for any audience members who couldn't make it in person to the show. The company hosts a couple events per year. This year they hosted a spring gala called Ballet in Bloom that featured a live performance and a short film, as well as a fireside chat with Catherine Morgan of Catherine Morgan and Friends as the guest of honor. Later this year, they'll debut an original spin on the classic Nutcracker story. The company also participates in a lot of community outreach and initiatives to bring ballet to everyone. So what do zombies have to do with all of this? Sweet Sorrow, a zombie ballet, is an LPBC original ballet that Leigh says aims to do for Halloween what Nutcracker has done for Christmas. This spooky ballet returns audiences to a forest in Verona, where the story of Romeo and Juliet continues in the underworld after they're dead. It's been performed by the company annually since 2017, and last year it was presented for the final time on the company's 5th anniversary. The ballet is resting now in the crypt to give the company a chance to perform newer original work. But Leigh says it will return one day, so horror fans don't worry. And as it turns out, LPBC has a lot of horror ballet fans. Did you even know that was a thing? The company has been profiled in The Advocate and featured on KTLA. Company dancers also won ABC's The Gong Show in 2017, where they performed a segment from Sweet Sorrow. The company has seen growing success in the past 5 years since its launch, and I was so happy to talk to Leigh about why she's passionate about teaching adults, the way she uses storytelling in her choreography, drawing from her experience as a filmmaker and novelist, and the newest ballet in the company's pipeline, an original twist on the Nutcracker called Cracked Nutcracker with a Twist, making its world premiere at the Lanterman Auditorium in La Cañada, California later this year on November 11th and 12th. I could talk forever and ever about all of the good Leigh is doing through the company for the ballet community, but I've talked too long already, and I think you should probably just hear it from her. Check out her interview. Hi, Leigh. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. I know you're so busy in the middle of in-studio rehearsals and with, remote rehearsals starting soon too. So
Oh, no, this is really exciting. I love that you're doing a podcast and especially aiming it at the adult ballet community. I've seen a lot of Instagram accounts, and that's great, but I think it's also nice to hear what people have to say. So
Yeah, totally. And I'm really excited to be talking to you actually because I feel like this whole idea kind of formulated from dancing with Leigh Purtill Ballet Company because I was looking for adult ballet podcasts. I just love listening to podcasts. And so I was looking for ones about the adult ballet community specifically, and I couldn't really find anything. There are like a couple out there that are good resources, but there was nothing that was, just interviews with people who are doing cool stuff with adult ballet. So it kind of all started formulating once I joined LPBC and saw what a great community there is. So I'm really excited to ask you a bunch of questions. I have like a million questions for you.
Oh, good. I feel sometimes like all I do is answer the same questions, or like, oh, do people really want to hear this? So I'm happy to answer anything. So.
Oh, I'm so excited. Well, I'm excited to hear whatever you have to say, and I'm sure our listeners are too. But I mean, obviously, I know who you are, but for anybody who's listening who isn't familiar with you and the work that you do, I was wondering if you could just give some background about who you are and some of the work you do at LPBC.
Oh, sure. So my name's Leigh Purtill, and I always have to pronounce that for people because it looks like it says Leigh. It's like I hear people say, "Is that Leah? Is it Leah?" So I always, I feel like I correct people a lot. But yeah, it's Leigh, and I am the artistic director of the Leigh Purtill Ballet Company. And we have been a nonprofit since 2017. But long before that, I've been working with adult ballet dancers in Los Angeles since 2008, I think. I used to work for a studio in Pasadena long before I went out on my own. I just started as a sub. I used to teach years ago. I've taught off and on for many, many years before I sort of committed to it. But when I was working for the studio, all my, I had these wonderful dancers, and it felt like they were missing opportunities to perform because whenever it came time for the Nutcracker or the spring show, they were sort of forgotten. And I thought that they should have, performance opportunities. So through that studio, I started choreographing dances for them. And soon people realized, oh, hey, the dancers that, Leigh, that take class with Leigh aren't just going to be standing on stage, sort of, like in Nutcracker, just like holding up a fake drink or something like that. They're actually dancing. They're doing point work. They're doing, actual choreography, and they're taking, and a lot of, they're doing a lot of character work too, which is a lot of fun. And I think something that's especially well suited for adult dancers. So it sort of started like that. So a lot of the dancers the entire group that started with the company in 2017 had been performing with me for years, before we actually formally had a company. So I feel like I've been doing this for a really long time.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm so glad that you had the idea to start something like this because I think you're right. There are classes like technique classes out there for adults, but it's so hard to find performance opportunities. And it's a bummer that people just assume, once you reach a certain age, you want to stop performing. And that's not always true. And I know we got connected a couple of years ago because I think it was during the pandemic. I was taking a virtual class on Instagram Live. And in the comments, someone mentioned that they danced with this company, Leigh Purtill Ballet Company, that was looking to audition for new dancers. And I was so nervous during my audition. I was like, what if they don't accept me? But it turned out to be just a wonderful process. And I discovered this incredibly supportive community. And I know that you just celebrated your 5-year anniversary last year. And you, during the pandemic, decided to open up the company to remote dancers all over the world as well, which is such a cool thing because you have, the physical studio location in the LA area. And then you also have these hybrid classes and rehearsals and performance opportunities with dancers all over the world, really. So I was curious how you got that idea. And, it doesn't seem to be something that a lot of ballet companies are doing. So how did you go about it? And, it seems like such a big undertaking.
It is it is a big undertaking, and it doesn't seem like that. When you step back and look at it, you go, oh my gosh, this is what we're doing, which is, really cool and has some big implications. I have always had this weird dream of having a company that was like all around the world, around the country. I didn't think global, but now I do. Now I'm thinking internationally. But originally, I had been thinking, I still kind of think this way too as we progress. We have, when you think about the company, we have company members. Everybody, whether they're performing or not, they are a company member. And then I thought it would be interesting or fun or certainly, exciting to have member companies. And I was envisioning many years ago that we would do something similar with other groups like mine across the country, and that we would all be connected through like choreography and shows like that. And that was sort of a pipe dream sort of thing, like, well, maybe in the future when we have more capital and we have the ability to, go out of our, leave LA and actually go out and meet people, we could start fostering those relationships. But then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden everything was online. And I had been doing some things online. I had my own YouTube channel that I would put up videos. And then when we had when we had to stay home, it was, I was online on YouTube the next day. I was on YouTube doing YouTube live, classes, teaching every single day. And I taught every single day. And it was something that I enjoyed. And I found that there were so many people out there that, I knew that they'd be missing ballet because I did. I missed the connection to the people. And we were able to sort of have a facsimile of that online. And it sort of pushed me and pushed the company into the idea of having remote dancers. And it started because I already had some dancers who, because I, live in Los Angeles, a lot of people come to LA, they take classes or whatever, I meet them that way, but then they move, they go back home to where maybe they came from, or they just move on in their lives. But they were, I was still in touch with them. And they were some of the first people that we had in the company who were remote dancers. And that's basically how it began. And the year, I remember that when you joined, everything obviously was remote, and that included even local dancers had to be online. And it sort of evened the playing field. It wasn't like anybody had anything, I don't want to say better than anybody else, but everybody truly was equal because they were in their home studios and, they didn't have access to, a lot of, technique class or this or that. So it was really a great opportunity to sort of just, take into account everybody wherever they were. And I remember your video.
Oh God.
No, it's not a bad thing at all. I mean, it's funny that you say you were so nervous, because I recall in my brain, I'm thinking of you as that you were very serious. I remember that very serious, that you were, it's like, oh my gosh, she's very serious, which was great. That's fine. But then come to meet you and you smile and laugh a lot and everything. And it's, but now that I understand, you were just nervous. So, but you came across as very serious.
I was so nervous. Yeah, I hadn't auditioned for anything since probably college, in my college dance program. And I remember my husband being like, just relax. This is a supportive adult ballet company. And there was nothing to be afraid of, but it was a great experience and still continues to be. And, what I think is so cool is you mentioned that the dance community sort of came together during the pandemic because everybody was dealing with the same things. Everybody's trying to maneuver around, kitchen tables and, holding on to whatever they have for a bar. And it kind of put us all in the same boat. But then even beyond, the pandemic, when things started opening back up, I feel like you've been able to retain such an incredibly supportive community of dancers, even with, people spread out all over and still continuing to do classes and rehearsals on Zoom. And you also do these really cool short films with all the remote dancers so that they can be played at the beginning of the live performances for the different performance opportunities we do throughout the year. And I think that's really cool too, because it brings the remote aspect not only to, dancers, but audiences as well, who maybe can't attend an in-person performance, but can watch the live stream of the short film that we put together. So I was curious for other arts organizations, because I haven't seen a lot of arts organizations doing something like this, if they're looking to attract new audiences or maybe transition to a new way of capturing their audience, what advice would you give them, or what have you learned along the way?
Well, what I've definitely found is that so much has transpired, and we understand audiences have very different needs now, and dancers have very different needs. There are a lot of people who, are either, because of where they live, they don't have access to, live performances, or only, limited performances, or for whatever reason they, are not able to get to a performance. And I think it's important to bring the arts to them in the way that they need to access it. And it's not easy, but I think that it is worth it, because that's part of making the arts inclusive of everybody. And I think that the dancers too are looking for that opportunity. They want something that, that will fit in with their schedule, that will fit in with what they have the, bandwidth, as you say, to do. You all have busy lives, but this is something that you still love, and you want to make time for it in the way that you can make time for it. I don't think that people should be punished because, the only way to do this is if you spend X number of hours in the studio with it's like, no, there has to be another way to get you in. And I don't want to exclude anybody. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do feel like some arts organizations, now that the pandemic is, quote, over, which, obviously we still have this, we still have COVID, and we still have a lot of people who are vulnerable. And I think that many of them just said, okay, we're done with that. Let's go back to the theater. And, they expected that everybody would just go back to the way it was. And that's just not the way it's going to be. And if you are not flexible and are not willing to try new things, and to pivot in new directions, I think that you will not be as successful as you could be.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And if there's anything we learned from the pandemic, it's that, the importance of it adapting, just as you mentioned. And I think it's so great what you're doing, because sometimes the world of ballet and dance in general can just feel so exclusive. And it's so important, as you said, to find all the different paths to bringing dancers and audiences into ballet who, might not have a certain amount of time to dedicate to it each week, or might not be able to get to the studio. And that kind of leads into my next question too, because I was curious also for other dance companies, or even just individual dancers who are looking to find that community, that supportive community. What advice would you give them, or, what are the best steps to sort of get started?
Well, if they don't have it, they should start it.
It's such important advice.
Yeah. But I think that's, I think a lot of people are like, oh gosh, I'd really like this. And I would love to do this where I am. And it's like, okay, start it. It doesn't take a lot of capital investment to do something online. Most everybody has Zoom. You can connect that way. And of course you can always connect with us, that's for sure. I think that the community is a lot bigger than we realize. And that's something that came out of the pandemic too, is that, we only have access to, I only have access to the dancers that I see, and who come into the studio or who contact me. And then you sort of find out, oh gosh, there's a huge group of people, and they just need to be connected. They just need, whether they do it through Instagram or Facebook or, what have you. And then building it from there. I think that it is definitely a grassroots effort. It takes actually. I think that the passion is really because it is time consuming, and it's trial and error and finding what works and what finding the people that will have the same, have similar interests and plans as you do. I mean, there are a lot of organizations, there are a lot of ballet companies, or not ballet companies, but ballet groups. I don't know how you would term them, but they definitely provide opportunities for adult dancers to perform, but they are not necessarily a company. So that may be, so I think that there are a lot of different types of opportunities depending on what it is that you want. And and if you don't see it, you should start it, or get enough people together to say, hey, let's do this.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's such underrated advice. If you don't see it, start it, because I think it can feel overwhelming, like easier said than done to so many people, but you can start small and just take baby steps and build toward, where you want to go. Like you started with YouTube live classes and it sort of built into an entire company from there. So I think that's such important advice for dancers. And I know you mentioned at the beginning how you sort of got started with the company, but I was curious about your own background also. How did you first get introduced to ballet? And can you talk about some of your background as a dancer?
Sure. I'm in typical fashion. My mother enrolled me in ballet classes and dance classes. And I think I was like maybe 3 or 4. And it was one of those, tap and ballet type classes, with the combo classes. I think they call them combo classes. Mm-hmm. And it was just a local studio, local school. And it was something that she had always wanted to do. And my brother, who played baseball, the baseball was something that my mother also really liked. So she put my brother in baseball, like Little League, and put me in dance. And of course, my brother continued to play baseball through college. But we did move a lot when I was a kid. So in every town we moved, the dance studio was one of the first things that we located and enrolled me in. And so I did a lot of recitals. I was in recital schools, as opposed to pre-professional schools. I think nowadays, and of course I'm going to show my age here, but I've been dancing for 55 years.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
So I say that only because I think people think that it's only something for young people. But I've been dancing for a really long time. But back then, pre-professional ballet schools and homeschooling so that dancers could also train, that was not a thing. That's, you see that all over on Instagram, and I'm sure a lot of people who have done that or who have children who are doing that now. And that's great, but that's not what the norm was back when I was a kid. It was really, you took your weekly classes, and if you were serious, you would continue on. You take more classes and private lessons, and maybe pursue it through college or something. But it's such a small, like a very, very tiny percentage of dancers go on to become professionals that really was never in my sights. And I was encouraged to do a lot of other activities in high school. So dance was just one of them. And then when I went to college, I sort of rediscovered it. And that was sort of I was lucky. I went to, my undergraduate was at Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts. Mount Holyoke had a wonderful, and still does have a great dance program. And I just fell in love with dance again. But as I've told many people this, I don't know if I've told you this, but I hated ballet. I hated it. I would run out of ballet classes in college with tears in my eyes because it wasn't something that came naturally to me. And even though I loved it when I was a kid, I think one of the things that happens is as your body changes, you start to drift away from an art form that is very exclusive. or can be considered that. So it wasn't something that I really, I didn't fall back in love with ballet. I just fell back in love with dance. And after college, I wanted to do some teaching. I also did a little bit of performing, but I enjoyed teaching, and I studied pedagogy in college. And when I went to the studio to interview for a job as a jazz teacher, which is what I loved and what I thought was pretty good at, the studio owner said, "Oh no, you're going to be my ballet instructor."
Surprise.
And I was like, what? No, no, no. And so I had to re-educate myself in ballet.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. So you rediscovered your love for ballet through getting back into teaching, really?
Mm-hmm. I know. And I was not a great teacher because, well, I mean, I wasn't a great teacher to begin with. It took a long time. I didn't really know how to teach children. That was hard. Teaching kids, I had the utmost respect for teachers who, especially movement teachers, because it's really hard. And I've done it. I've taught all levels, all ages, from like 3 up to teens. Of course, adults as well. But it's really hard to do, and I think that you really have to have a lot of patience, and it's a true gift to teach kids. I don't know how I learned anything, because I mean, it's hard to do.
It's so hard.
Yeah, but it's really hard. But then, once I sort of found the adult community, and as I mentioned earlier, I got into that through subbing, because I'm also a writer, and so I was writing books. I've had multiple careers, but at the time that I was writing novels and publishing novels, I also was looking for additional work, and I found my way back into ballet and back into teaching. And I never really left it, but I realized that I was a pretty good adult ballet teacher. And it was, I think, primarily because I was one of them. I was an adult ballet dancer, even though I'd studied since I was a kid. I understood them. I understood that there's a lot of stuff that adult dancers take with them into the studio, and that you have to, you can't just treat them like children. They're not the same at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you continue to be an incredible adult ballet teacher. I've learned so much studying with you. I never imagined that I would be able to get my pirouettes back on point after being off of it for so long. And they're not perfect, but I'm getting there. And I feel like I owe a lot of that to you and Dancing with the Company. So, but you also mentioned that you're a writer, and I definitely want to get back to that, because I feel like you've mentioned it a couple times in passing, and it's always been like, oh yeah, I wrote a couple novels, and like, that's a huge deal. So we need to talk about that. Just real quick, before that, you mentioned, some of the challenges you encountered in college with ballet. And I think that's a common sentiment, some of the it's so rigorous, and it can be, it can require so much perfectionism that I think a lot of people feel driven away from the passion of it. And I was curious if some of those challenges that you encountered play a part in why you want to make ballet more accessible.
Yes, absolutely. That is something like I knew ballet dancers in college that were they were beautiful. They were, their technique was stunning, and they they would go on to do other things. Whether they went on to perform professionally, I don't know, but it definitely felt like they were a different breed of people, and it wasn't something that I felt I was like. There's one teacher I had, one ballet instructor I had that I always remember at Mount Holyoke, who would sort of gave me I kept this with me forever and ever, and I still think of it now, is she would say something like, well, what's the little story that you're telling in your head when you do adagio? And she said it. She was like, and I just remember this, she would say, she would tell, like, she would demonstrate the adagio and she would say what was in her mind, like the little story that she was telling. And I thought, that's great. That's a really tremendous way to make ballet accessible to people, because it's not just, that's a storytelling. It's using movement to tell a story, to tell your story. And I love that because I never thought of it that way. I always thought of modern dance, sort of like, your own personal expression, or jazz dance. But ballet felt to me like, as you said, is rigorous and disciplined, and it didn't seem to have a lot of room for creative expression. It felt like, well, here's Swan Lake, and here is the role that you're going to be playing, and you don't really have a lot of input on that. And like what we do is very character based. So like all the movement begins with the story. All the movement begins with what the character is, and that is not something that I found when I was studying ballet until I found that one teacher, Hannah Wiley. But yeah, there's the actual creative expression that I think is not necessarily encouraged in the ballet world, especially when you're young. But then, of course, there is the physical requirements and that like rigidity of appearance or technical skill. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people feel that. And that's part of the reason why, they quit ballet when they're young or maybe don't come back to it as adults. So I think that's such an important message, is that ballet can be accessible for everyone. And I love that adagio exercise. I've never thought about it as actually telling a story, but I'm going to have to try that in my head in my next class. That's
yeah, great. I do that because I do that a lot when I'm teaching. When I teach class in person, like I know you take my point class, but with my technique class, that is something I will, especially I'll encourage my, all classes really, because all levels of dancer can tell a story, whether they're brand new or whether they're, advanced dancers, they can tell the story that's in their head. It's a different story for you and for me than it is for me. So.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that. And that's a great transition into my next question too, because, you mentioned you're a novelist. You've written 2 young adult novels, if I'm correct. And I was curious if you could, well, first of all, just talk about that because it's so cool and such a big accomplishment. But, also how is your writing experience sort of translated to your storytelling as a dancer yourself, but also as a teacher and a choreographer? And how do those 2 skills sort of feed into each other?
Oh, there you go. That's a good question. Nobody's asked us. See, this is what I'm saying. Nobody's asked that question. That's wonderful. Okay. So I know, but I've talked to a lot of people, but they all tend to ask the same questions. But nobody's asked that before. So when I went to graduate school, but I studied film production. I have a master's in film, and particularly screenwriting. So. I loved adapting novels for, writing, like screenwriting for screenplays, and then also, writing original stories. And I moved to New York and obviously continued to dance and everything. But I pursued, I was working in production as a script supervisor on movie sets and TV and, commercials and all that sort of thing. And also writing and hoping that, somebody sometime would want to, produce one of my screenplays, or I would, direct it. Because I wanted to be a director. And it's funny how things sort of turned around.
Yeah.
I moved out. It's all kind of comes together with the company. So when I moved out to LA with my husband, I got out of production and I started working in television. I worked as a broadcast standards editor for the WB. And I started writing something that was not, like, I had been writing had been writing screenplays. I'd never written a novel before. I think I might have started one and I got maybe 3 chapters in and it was terrible. And then I had this idea, and I started writing it, and it became this huge thing. And I remember giving it to a friend and I said, "Is this a novel? I think I wrote a novel." And he read it and he said, "Yeah, you 100% did write a novel, and it's good." And I thought, wow, that's really crazy. I didn't think I was going to write I love reading, I love writing, and I can't imagine that I wrote a novel. And sure enough, that wasn't the first novel that I sold. The second novel I wrote sold first. And then that was called, the first novel I wrote it was called, the working title was called Fat Girls in LA. And it was basically like I had moved out here and it felt like every person I saw was like skinny, and there were no, like, even if you were a size 2, you felt like you were a fat girl in LA, and so it ultimately was published with Penguin it was called All About V. And that was the first novel I wrote, but it was the second one that was published. The first one that was published was called Love, Meg. And the original title of that was Jennifer Aniston is My Best Friend. And that was about, these are both young adult novels. And that was also published with Penguin. And so I left my job at the WB because I had an agent and I was publishing 2 novels. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be a writer now. This is great. And they're going to put my novels in the movies and TV, and isn't this going to be wonderful? I'm going to be a professional writer. And I was like, this isn't happening very fast. So I started teaching again, and I still writing, still teaching. And then, I started doing more teaching and less writing. Less publishing. I did have 2 more novels published with a pen name Cat Jordan, and that was with HarperCollins. So those 2 novels were published in 2016 and 2017. So there was a big gap of time when all I was doing was I was writing, but I'm not publishing. And then I was teaching and choreographing. And so Sweet Sorrow, this is a long story. So Sweet Sorrow was based on, so basically there was a tiny little piece of music called Dance of the Nights by Prokofiev that comes from Romeo and Juliet. And that's the iconic zombie ballet, that one. And I sort of created this little story, and it became a bigger story. And then I decided to write it as a novel. So I wrote it as a novel. It hasn't been published, but I hope at some point it will be. And then there was the stage version. And what I was finding was that, and I am finding this now, is like, I love to write, but I also get a lot of my creative and storytelling expression through the stage, through the storytelling on stage and through movement. So that's one of the reasons why all of my shows, all of the character, like everything comes from character, everything comes from the story that is being told. And I work with the dancers to create that so that they are in impacting the way the story is developed. So that has been really exciting for me. And it's not that I don't want to continue to write, because I do continue to write. I've written a lot of other novels. But I feel like I do have the opportunity to be the writer of the story of the ballets, so coming full circle, I have my master's in film. And so we do our short films, which I love. My remote dancers, which is one of the reasons why I'm never going to give that up, because I love it so much. I loved going to film school. I love storytelling through film. So there's that. And then I get to be a director because I'm directing the dancers on the stage. and I'm choreographing their movement. And so it all kind of culminates in these productions that we're doing. And it's like very, very creatively fulfilling.
That is so cool and so inspiring to me how you took literally every single thing that you love, film, writing, ballet, and just combined it all so that you get to do these things that you love every single day. I think, that's such a gift to be able to do that. And that whole story is so crazy to me. The fact that, you were just like, oh, I think I accidentally wrote a novel and it's really good and Penguin's going to publish it. That's crazy. But also, completely unsurprising to me because you have this knack for really creative, incredible storytelling. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It's so inspiring. And, you mentioned Sweet Sorrow, a zombie ballet, which we're recording this a little early. So it's still sort of the tail end of summer, but this episode will publish in October. So it'll be perfect. But this is probably the most famous ballet with Leigh Purtill Ballet Company. It's kind of marketed as, for Halloween, what Nutcracker is for Christmas. And it's a sequel to Romeo and Juliet, but it takes place after they're dead and there are zombies in it. And I just think this is so cool. And I read in another interview that you said, initially some people told you you were crazy for this idea of Sweet Sorrow. And I'm curious if you could just, one, talk about the show and, how the idea sort of, you kind of talked a little bit about how it formulated, but how you made it a reality. And also, how did you ignore some of those critical voices and follow your dream instead?
There are a lot of people who didn't think it was going to be anything. They sort of turned their nose up at it, like, oh, that's not real ballet. But the initial idea came from I was teaching, and I had an accompanist who was an amazing accompanist, and he played that Prokofiev piece. And I think I did Grand Battement to it or something like that. I'm like, wow, that's great. But it stuck in my head. And I thought, and it was right around Halloween time. And I thought, we were doing an adagio. This is my intermediate level group or my advanced group. And I said, why don't we take this adagio and we use this very dramatic piece of music from Romeo and Juliet and do it like your zombies. And I think it was right around the time, it might have been before Shaun of the Dead or right Shaun. So it's kind of like zombies were on my mind. I love horror movies and I love zombies. I think they're like, I love George Romero's movies. And so it's sort of like this confluence of things at the same time. And then I used it a few more times. I said, well, why don't we do this again? Let's, it was, everybody loved it. It was because dancers love to be in character. It's like, that's part of dancing is you become another person. You become another thing. And so I think a lot of people just really enjoyed that idea of being a zombie. And then the following summer, I think I used it I was teaching a teen intensive with a friend of mine, ballet intensive, and I gave it to them and they loved it too. And it was just like one of those things where it's like, wow, everybody seems to really like doing this. So it wasn't necessarily a matter of people watching it and thinking it was cool. It was the people doing it that felt that it was like cool, and that was what I really liked about it, that it was sort of dancer proof because anybody could do it no matter what level they were at in terms of their technique and how much experience they had because it was character based. And so not long after that, I showcased it at an event called Art Night Pasadena, and it just happened to be like around Halloween time. And the audience loved it. And it was not anything, I mean, some of the movement is that iconic movement is still in it, but the audience freaked out. And it was like, wow, okay, this is really, I think we got something here. I got something. And everybody, every time you mentioned it, it was just, what's that? Zombie ballet? What is that? I would like to see that. And at the time, it was just called Zombie Ballet. And then it sort of built from there. And we put it at a horror convention in 2016. And it was, I brought my dancers to Scare LA in Pasadena. And the way I looked at that was, well, whatever. If people like it, they like it. I really don't care because it's the horror community and we're ballet dancers. And they loved it. And it was like, wow, okay, these people like this too. So it's not just ballet dancers or arts audiences, it's also the horror community. And so when you sort of look at something that has that broad appeal, that's really when you know that you have something that could be popular, or that you're kind of on the right track. So, it sort of, it sounds like it would be it's a zombie ballet. It sounds like it would be very niche, but it actually is not. So it kind of grew from there. And knowing those initial comments from people, seeing people just follow my dancers around at the horror convention and just like, can we take a picture? Can we take a picture? And like you starting to play the music and people running across the convention floor to see it. It was like, and that's exactly what happened. Like one of the last events that we went to before the pandemic, that's exactly what happened. They would play the music and you just see people running to wherever they were to perform it. It was just like, it was like, whoa, okay, this is cool. And so that is the way that I sort of, prevent myself from letting the voices of people saying, well, nobody's going to take you seriously. You're going to, give ballet a bad name, or, you can't just that's another thing. You can't just let anybody do ballet. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Anybody can do ballet. And it was, people just, not only turning your nose up at the zombie ballet connection, but just sort of like, well, if you're going to do that, then you're not doing real ballet, and you're not letting real ballet, real ballet dancers are doing it. So I think the initial response that I got from people at Art Night Pasadena, at the horror conventions, and then of course when we went on the Gong Show in 2017 and we won, and the reactions that we had there from people that I respected, I think that is sort of like I hung my hat on that and said, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to keep going with this.
That's great. And I'm so glad you kept going with it. It's obviously been a huge success. And just some of that criticism, obviously, yeah, anybody can do ballet. How sad would it be if we didn't include anybody who wants to dance? That would completely defeat the purpose of self-expression in dance. So I'm glad that you didn't listen to the criticism. And I just think it's creative and it's different, but you're right. It's also so fun to do. Like there's video of, Catherine Morgan doing it, who was the guest of honor at our first gala this year. And I just think it's fun because there's so much to love about the classic story ballets, but there's also so much to love about getting to be in these interesting characters and doing movements that are different that you don't see in some of the classic ballets. So I think that's awesome. And you've created a lot of other original ballets for the company as well. You have, Circus of Worldly Wonders that previewed last year and is being developed into a full-length ballet. And then you have Hotel at the End of the Universe. And you have a new take on the Nutcracker coming this November called Cracked Nutcracker with a Twist. And it's sort of a reinvention of the classic Nutcracker that follows the story of the maid inside the castle. And she goes on this big adventure through the land of the Fae. So I was curious if you could talk about that and, what's different about that story and some of the changes you made to the original Nutcracker.
Absolutely. Well, the number one change is that the original ballet, as it's told on multiple stages across the continents all around the world, it is very child heavy, right? I don't mean child heavy. That sounds weird. It's all about the kids. It's about Clara. And it's a love story. It's always framed as depending on how the story is told by the different schools. It is geared towards kids, about Christmas and presents, and the Nutcracker doll given as a gift, and then the Nutcracker doll coming to life and becoming, depending on who's telling the story, they usually, become sort of a love story or a romance of some kind. it's kind of there's nothing wrong with it. I love it. And I will watch any iteration of any Nutcracker. I love them. And I love I love it completely classic. I love it. But I also feel like there are a lot of great companies doing that, and that's great. But if we're going to do something like that, I think I wanted to do something that was original to us. And the Leigh Purtill Ballet Company is an adult ballet company. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. We have a couple of kids in our show this year, and they're wonderful, and I'm excited to work with them. But it's not about, it's not there aren't a lot of kids. It's not kid centered. It's family friendly for sure, but it's enjoyable by anybody, kind of like Sweet Sorrow, but without anything scary. There's nothing scary in ours, but it is focused on an adult character, and in this case, it's somebody that is not, she's not a princess. She's not a wannabe princess. She's a hardworking maid, and she's somebody who, does a lot of work and doesn't necessarily get appreciated. And I think a lot of people can identify with that character, as opposed to, the rich little girl who has, a huge party with life-size dolls and then, goes on an adventure in Candyland. So that's kind of the primary difference in terms of storytelling. And then, of course, because I didn't want to, like Nora, our maid character, isn't going to go to the land of the sweets, right? That's not what she's interested in. So she goes to the land of the Fae, which is, has a lot of characters from Celtic mythology. So just something different, but we are still using all the classical music from the original Tchaikovsky score. So that's great too. It's a challenge because now we're using the same music that is going to, for a lot of people, you're going to hear a piece of music and think, oh, that's, Spanish chocolate, or that's, Arabian coffee. And it's like, nope, not in our show. We're not doing that, but we're still going to use the music. So it's a challenge to make the music, reflect different characters and a different story.
And what I love about this ballet, and really your storytelling in all of your ballets, is that you get so many different perspectives that it really does just go back to your mission of bringing ballet to everyone, because anyone who comes to see the show or who performs in the show has a character they can relate to or something that they love. And it's cool to get the perspective, as you said, of the maid, instead of, following Clara through the story. I think it's just going to be such a cool show. And I literally can't wait till November and to start working on, because this week we're starting to work on the short film for the remote dancers. So that's going to be fun too. And I know we only have a few minutes left because I know you're busy doing a million things right now. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but we do have a Petite Allegro section on the podcast where I just ask you a bunch of quick, fun questions about ballet.
Oh, sure. Of course.
So I know in the last episode, I spoke with the guests about having a ballet buddy or a friend that you can do ballet class with. And we talked about how sometimes, especially, when you're dancing at home, like we all did during the pandemic, friends can be pets too. And you have a dog named Blossom. You just posted about her on your Instagram, and she shows up a lot at rehearsals or classes. So I was curious where the name Blossom came from and how she became your ballet buddy.
Oh, okay. So my first dog was a mixed Chihuahua breed, and her name, we rescued her, and the shelters gave her the name of Peaches, and we just kept it. And somehow when I saw a picture of Blossom, this little dog, and again, she was a stray, we rescued her too, and I looked at her and I said, her name is Blossom. It's just the way it is. She was white. She's like this fluffy little white dog. And it just popped up. And then I realized it's like Peaches and Blossom. There's all that kind of, goes together. And I don't know, she just seemed like a blossom to me. And she's hilarious. And when I was teaching my YouTube Live, every single time I would teach class, she would come in right around rond de jambe. She would have to be right underneath my feet, just as I was doing rond de jambe, and she would get right underneath, and it'd be like I would be, sweeping her along en dehors, à terre. It was hilarious. I was like, okay, here's rond de jambe. Here comes Blossom.
That's amazing. I love her. I love the name Blossom. She's so cute, and she obviously loves the relaxing rond de jambe music. So she's good taste. Yeah. And then you can answer any of these questions as, from your perspective as a dancer or a teacher, obviously, but is there a go-to item that you have to have in your ballet bag at every class or rehearsal?
I wear a pair of, they're not exactly I guess they are parachute pants. They're long. And I always have to have them. And I either they're not the super thick ones. Those used to be my must-haves. And then for a while they weren't made. Those were the really heavy duty vinyl ones that, I would wear in New York, in classes in New York in the summertime, and just sweat, which is, you could not have warm muscles. Your sweat would just drip down out of those. These are not the same, but I don't know. There's something about having them that makes me feel like, I'm in class as opposed to teaching.
Is there a famous ballet dancer who inspires you or who you've looked up to throughout your career?
That has changed at various times. I was of the generation that Gelsey Kirkland was sort of the ideal, because she was fantastic. She's a gorgeous dancer. But she also had a novel. She published a memoir that sort of detailed some unsavory parts of the ballet world. And, we all gobbled that book up and went, oh my gosh, so we just want to smoke cigarettes and do a lot of drugs. No, I'm joking. Totally joking. That's not what we did. But she was really, really amazing, Gelsey Kirkland. And she still is. She still is tremendous. Sylvie Guillaume, I love her. I think her feet are something that you just want to, you just want to take a mental picture of them and just imagine that your feet are like hers, her arches. So those two, I would say, are really, tremendous. I love watching them. I love watching videos of them. But I also love watching videos of, Wendy Whalen, who's, another tremendous performer. Suzanne Farrell. I know those are older dancers, but that's, I think that dancers who are able to continue into their 40s and 50s give us very different performance quality. And that's something I enjoy. Virtuosity is wonderful. I love seeing people. I'm impressed with a million fouette turns, and those are tremendous. But I think that character is something that I'm much more interested in these days, and seeing full body performance,
I was also curious, is there a city that you would love to travel to and dance in?
Oh, I would love to go to, I've been to Florence, Italy, but I feel like, and I didn't dance there. I would love to take a group of dancers. This has been my dream. I would love to take a group of dancers to Italy and to dance and perform there. I think that would just be amazing, because I love Italy. I think it's a really rich and historic country, and of course has a huge ballet history. Of course Paris, France does as well. But that would be my dream. I would love to take a group of dancers to Italy. That would be fantastic. You want to do that, Elizabeth? Should we do that?
Amazing. Yeah, sign me up. I'm all in. And then my last question is just, given everything we've talked about, in a perfect world, what would ballet look like, or what would you want it to be?
I would love to see more women as artistic directors and choreographers, and just leaders in the ballet world are not as, we just don't see them. And so I think that it's great. I would love more inclusivity of everybody, And I would love to see more, women and, non-binary leaders, in those top roles, in companies, because I think that would be the way to affect real change. It's great. Ground up is great, but I think top down is, also have to happen.
Yeah, 100% across the board. I agree with you. And, you're one of those women in a leadership role in ballet who's making great changes with your company. So I'm so happy to have the chance to talk with you and also to dance with you. So I really appreciate your time. And I was wondering if you could just let people know where they can find you and connect with you, your social media handles or maybe your company website.
Oh, sure. The company website is Leigh Purtill Ballet Company.org. And my classes and information about, taking class with me is at leighpurtillballet.com. There's all these things that say Leigh Purtill. And I think we are both, I'm on Instagram as Leigh Purtill, and the company is on Instagram as Leigh Purtill Ballet Company. And I think we are also on Facebook. We don't do Twitter. Or whatever it is now.
Yeah, I can't keep up.
But yeah, Instagram and Facebook, I think, are the best places to find us. And our website definitely has a lot of information about what's going on. And we're always, I do hope that I don't want to ever give up the remote component of the ballet company, because I think that is really important. And I hope that people listening, if they think that they might want to join the company, that they consider that, look into it, because contact us or just, stop by and say hello, because I want that to continue.
Yeah, me too. Definitely. Anyone who's listening, check out the company and inquire about how you can be a part of it. It's such a great community. And we'll link to the website and the social media handles in the podcast description. And I don't know if the Eventbrite page is up for Cracked, Nutcracker with a Twist yet, but if it is, I'll put a link to that too in the description. But Leigh, thank you so much for taking the time. I can't tell you how much it means to me to be able to, I don't think we've ever gotten a chance to actually sit down and talk about the background of the company and your background. So I appreciate getting to learn so much from you.
Thank you so much for even asking me. I feel really honored that, that you would want to know. So my life is an open book, Elizabeth. You can ask me anything.
Literally and figuratively, because you're also
yes.
a novelist.
Exactly.
So that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll see you later this week on Friday for rehearsals.
Yes, you will.
The way that Leigh talks about storytelling as a dancer shows how passionate she is. And I love that she was able to weave three of her favorite things together to create this company: film, stories, and dance. She's the best, and she's created such a wonderfully supportive group of dancers and friends. We talked toward the end about Cracked, Nutcracker with a Twist, and I mentioned I wasn't sure if the Eventbrite page to buy tickets was up yet. I'm still getting the hang of hosting a monthly podcast. We recorded this interview early, but it's a month before the show opens, and yes, the Eventbrite page is absolutely up and running. You can buy tickets, and you should, because Leigh has created such a charming Nutcracker story. The show opens on November 11th at 7 p.m. at the Lanterman Auditorium in La Cañada, California. And if you can't make it that day, there's another show on November 12th at 4 p.m. LPVC also has a supporter program, which not only furthers its mission and enables the company to continue redefining ballet storytelling, but gives supporters access to discounted tickets. The company offers benefits to sponsors for different levels of support, and all donations are tax deductible. I'll include a link to the company website for info about how to join or support what they're doing, the Eventbrite page for tickets to the upcoming production, and the sponsorship info page, all in the podcast description. Thank you so much to Leigh for talking with me, and thanks everybody for listening. Next month, we have a guest that in the few short months that this podcast has been up and running, I've already received several emails and social media messages with requests to have this person do an interview. It's happening. I'm so excited to talk to them. Look for that episode on November 7th. In the meantime, happy pumpkin or zombie season. Happy dancing, and see you at the bar.